Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this menu I'm going to show you sort of follow up on a previous menu or a previous video where I had created a slide up footer menu. So this is the footer that we had created. So it's a sticky slider. So you can see that it sticks to the bottom, and when you click on these, then it brings up a contextual menu. So favorites, about, bookshelf, help, right? So what we want to do is, I told you that we would take it a little bit farther, and you can see here that we're pulling open the same panel, but we're just changing the panel header based on whichever icon that we're clicking. And what I want to do is I want to have unique information here. So right now when you click on it, it doesn't matter what you go to, you have sort of the same list of items. And one way to do it is to just create separate panels and then just change this information here, which is what we've done. We did that in the previous video. But what I want to do is I want to use the same piece of HTML for this panel, and I want to inject new data into this section right here. We're going to call this the panel menu. And so let's just save that for now, and we can comment this out. I don't need that data anymore. So what we have now is each time you click, you get a different label. Okay, and what we want to do is fill in unique information into this spot. So we got to make a couple of changes up here. One, we're going to call this a data title. So just going to make that change right now. And then we also need to create something called, we can do this more efficiently. We need to create something called data label. Now we're using a data label, but we're going to change what the data label is at this point. So for each of these, we're going to have an under lowercase. So the first one is going to be called bookshelf. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this data label in order to connect to our JSON data. And when we click here, if the data label equals bookshelf, then we're going to go into a specific part of our data and pull out the relevant data that we need. So trying to be a little bit efficient with our data, not creating lots of different objects. This is obviously for a very small data set. This is not a large application, but just sort of gives you the idea of how you would do this. If you had a large data set, you might want to put it into a database and create an API. That way you can connect more easily to large chunks of data. But it all sort of works the same. It's just you don't want to do all that by hand. It's a lot. So the second one is going to be about, and the third one is going to be favorites, and the last one is going to be help. Okay, so these are our labels, and then these are our titles. So every time we click it, it should be messed up now. Okay, see, so data label is the one that we just did. So that's not what we want. What we want is when we click on the footer nav menu item, we want the title to show. So the way we do this, we're going to say change these to title. So when we click on here, we go into the data title, and we store that as a variable called title. And then we go into the panel header, and we don't want label, we want title instead. So now when we do that, it shows the title string that we put in there. So we don't have to worry about uppercase or lowercase or doing sort of regular expressions to separate these things out or anything funky like that. And then when we click on it, it's also storing this data label right here into this variable called label. So we're going to use that in just a moment. I think that's the setup for our HTML. I don't think we need anything else. Our CSS is fine. Everything is hooked up the way that it should be with CSS, so now we should just be working with our JavaScript at this point. Now what we need to do is we need to create a data structure. Now we're going to use JSON, and let's just put it here. And the way we're going to do is we're going to call a variable, and we're going to call it panel data. And panel data is going to be equal to this object. Now inside this object is going to be our JSON. So we have a few different pieces of information, nodes if you will, or entry points into our data. And all of our entry points are going to be based off of these data labels. So we just need to recreate those here. And in JSON you have, on the left you have a key, and on the right you have a value. So bookshelf is going to be our key, and then we usually have some sort of a string for a value here. So I'm just gonna, this is gonna probably throw an error or something, but I just want to set all this out. So about, same thing, and favorites, same thing. And then the last one is going to be help. Okay. And on the very last key value pair for your object, you don't need a comma. So you only need commas for what's before. Okay, so what we want is for our bookshelf, we want to have a series of book titles. We're going to call them book title or book name or something. In the About section, we want to have a section of HTML. In the Favorites, we want to have an array or a group of websites that are our favorite websites. And then under Help, we're going to have some links that people could theoretically click on. I'm not going to make them actual links, but we're just going to sort of pretend that they are links. And so these are pieces of data that we need. And normally there's one key for one piece of data. If you want a value that is more than one string and they're separate things, then you need to create an array of objects. And the way that we create an array, is we use our square braces, square brackets some people might say, and then inside of those we need to create an object. So we have one object, and we're going to have 4 books. So we need 4 of these objects. It seems a little tedious to write JSON, and it is tedious to write JSON, and that's why you should, in a large data set, you would never write it by hand like this. And so on our bookshelf, we're going to have 4 books, and each of them we need a key value pair for an object in a JSON format. So it's going to be book title, and then we need our colon, and then we need to fill in some string. The first one, I'm just pulling these off the screen. So the first one, Anna Karenina, and then Madame Bovary. So these are going to be the books, classic books on our bookshelf. War and Peace. And the last one is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So on our bookshelf we have 4 books, and they each have the book title of this string on the other side. Okay. So what does it look like though? So let's console log panel data, so you can just sort of get a sense of what our data is looking like at this point. And we need to do it this way. So when we look at our console, we have an object, and inside that object we have multiple pieces of information. So we have our about, we have our bookshelf with our 4 objects in it, And if we open that up, we can see each object has a book title, and that book title has a string. It has a value attached to it. So we have those four, and then we have our favorites, and then we have help. Now these are also going to be arrays just like this, so that we can loop through that array and get all this information out of it. And then this is just going to be some HTML text that we can just get right now. Meaningful Ipsum is a project that I've started. my name.github.io/meaningful-ipsum, and essentially it's just first chapters from really famous stories in the world, and you can just simply copy and paste that into projects that you're using. And for our about section, I'm going to cheat a little bit. This is not normally what you want to do with data, but I'm going to put some HTML in there. You can do that with your string. It's not a big deal. But you typically want to keep your data as clean as possible, which means keeping markup out of your data. But we're going to use this for now, so we can take this big lump sum and just kind of plop it into the website without having to do anything to it. And so now if we save and we come back to our object, you can see now that we have our object here, and then there is our about, and then this all, you can see our text there is coming through, and then we have our bookshelf with the 4 objects. And now we need to create our favorites. So for the favorites, we're going to do a very similar thing that we did here. So let's just copy that, and we can paste that here. And so our favorites, instead of a book title, we're going to have a website, and the website is going to be, I just looked up some of the famous websites in the world. So just like that. And so we have several websites, and these are going to be our favorite websites, and these are going to be output to the screen as well. So when we click up here, it should be a list of our favorites. When we click here, it should be all of our HTML, this section right here, all this should be placed here. And then when we click here on our bookshelf, we should get a list of all the books on our bookshelf. And then finally we're going to do our help section, which is also an array, and it's an array of links. And then our links, we're just going to do like product 1, and then we're going to say history, and then we're going to say shipping info, and then the last one will be contact us. Okay, so theoretically these would be links that are going to show up under our help section. So now we have all of our data inside of this object. It's called panel data. So let's save this and we can take a look at it in the console. And so you can see we have our about with our text, we have our bookshelf with 4 items, we have our favorites with 4 items, and again, if you expand these out, you can see that they each have key and values as pairs. And so what we can do is we can actually loop through this array, going into each of these objects and getting the value from this key value pair. And we can do that for each one of these, and that's sort of what we're setting up, so that whenever we click on this menu item, it gets this data label. It uses that data label to attach to these entry points in our data, and then once we get inside of here, we're going to loop through that data and we're going to pull out each of these individually. So what I want to do before I move on is I want to make sure that this is all linted and okay. So there's a website called JSON .com, and so essentially it's just a validator for your JSON. So you just put it in there, click validate your JSON, and then it validates it for you. I sort of like the style that it gives to it, so I'm going to just replace this with what it gave me. So you can see that it just sort of makes everything a little bit easier to see. You could even spread this out a little bit just to make things a little bit easier to see. But you wind up with the same data. It's just formatted a little bit prettier than the way that I wrote it. The way I wrote it is a way for me to sort of keep track a little bit easier of what all is going on. Okay, so we're not going to log that anymore because we already have it, and so we're able to just sort of move through the data as we need it. Now we need to create the last part, which is to actually collect our data into a variable, and then input it or output it to the screen. So we come down here, and so when we click on the footer nav menu item, which is one of these icons, then we're collecting the label and we're collecting the title. Now we're already doing this part here where we take the title and we put it into this space right here. That's just being injected right here into this H2. So we're just taking the text from that data title and we're just injecting the text right into the panel header. And then we add the class of active, which pushes the panel up. So that was from the first video. So if you have missed that first video, go back and watch it and you can see how we got to the place where we are for this video. What we need to do is we need to set up some conditional statements. So we say if label, so if this variable right here, if it's equal to, let's take our first one, bookshelf, then we want to do something. If this is equal to bookshelf, when we click here, then essentially what we wanted to do is we want to go into panel data dot bookshelf, and then we want to loop through all this, and then we want to get all of these pieces of information. Each time it loops through, we want to get that piece of information, and then we want to build our list item, and we want to inject that piece of information each time. So each time we're going to build a list item, inject that information, so Madame Bovary or War and Peace or whatever the value is, we're going to inject that here, and then we're going to append this list item to the panel menu. So each time it loops through, it builds a fresh one of these list items. And we can say variable bookshelf is going to be equal to panel data dot bookshelf. So if the label is bookshelf, then we're going to create a variable called bookshelf, which is just panel data dot bookshelf. So it's going up here and it's saying panel data dot bookshelf, and so now we get here. So that if we console log that, you can see exactly the object that's being put in here. Oh, we have to click it. So if we click on it, then it goes and it console logs this object. So it gets us into the bookshelf, you can see, and then now we have our titles. And so now all we have to do is loop through using a for each loop, and then we need to get this value here each time it loops through. So we say in jQuery, we say dot each, and so for each bookshelf, so essentially for each book, each of these, what are they? The I, the index. So for each of these objects in bookshelf, we're going to run a function and we're going to do something. So we need an index and a value here, and then we're going to console log. I'm not going to do this for everyone, but I just want you to be able to see the process, because we're going to sort of not reinvent the wheel as we go through this. So for each loop through bookshelf, we're going to collect the index and then the value. The value is going to be the right side string. The index is going to be which one, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this should output our object that says book title and then whatever the value is. So let's save that, and we go in, and so for each one of these, when we click on it, it gives us each of the main objects of our bookshelf. And so now we can go into this object and we can pull out this information. So each time we want to say variable book title is equal to value, so the object that we're in, and then we go into book title, and book title is here. So for each time we go to book title, and then we're going to get that value, and this is all that we have to do in order to get that value, and we store the value in book title. So the first time it loops through our bookshelf, it's going to get the book title of Anna Karenina, and the second one Madame Bovary, and then War and Peace, and then The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and then our loop will stop because there's no more objects inside of the bookshelf. So once we get that value, what we want to do each time is we want to output our list item, remember? So we want to go to our panel menu, and we want to append a new list item. So we say panel menu append, and then we say list item. Each of these list items has a class, and that class is called panel item. So we're going to put that down here. We're going to say class equals panel item. So each time it builds one of these list items, it attaches this class, and that class has some specific CSS attached to it so that it gets output correctly to the screen. And now we need to put something inside of our list item. Normally we would put something here and there would be text in the list item, but what we want is dynamic text. So the way that we do that, when you break into an HTML string that you're outputting to the page in JavaScript, you can use single or double quotes. I like single quotes, and then you put 2 plus signs, and so now whatever we put here is going to concatenate. It's going to be input sort of squeezed in between these 2 brackets. And the thing that we want, the piece of data that we want, is this book title. So each time it loops through, we build a list item, and then it takes that specific book title, puts it in here, goes to the next one, builds another list item, puts the next book title, etc. So book title, and then we save that, and this is going to happen when we click our footer menu nav item. So it's not building in the background, it's not doing anything until the user clicks on one of these items, and right now all we have is this one. So it's going to collect the information, change the panel header. If this label is equal to bookshelf, then we're going to go into our bookshelf section of our data right here, and then we're going to do a for each loop through each of these items. That's what this is. So for each item in bookshelf, we're going to get the book title by going into book title and getting this piece of information, and then we're going to go to our panel menu, we're going to append a list item, and we're going to fill it in with the book title. So this is how it should work, and let's save it again just to make sure. So we save it here, and when we click on this, you can see that it went through grabbed each of our pieces of information, output it as a list item into our bookshelf. Now if we go over here, it's pushing it into the same panel. You know, the only thing we're changing here is this, but we're gonna make changes to this. So this does work, okay, at least for the bookshelf. Now so let's put another one, and not an if statement, let's do an else. If the label equals about, then we want to go to our about info, and that's at panel data. So panel data dot about, and then we don't need to loop through anything. Really all we need to do is we need to take this, we don't need an each loop for that. We just need to output all that, you know, that I had that big glob of HTML. All we need to do is just output that as a panel item. So what I'm going to do is say about info, and then that's just going to append, it's going to create one list item right here under panel menu, and it's just going to dump all that HTML out onto the page. It's very lovely. So when we click on that, this is just one list item, menu item, and it's just sort of dumping all that data out onto the page. Now we're going to run into some issues. So what happens, it all works really well, except every time I click on one of these, it's going to append the information. You see that? So it's appending the information. That's not what we want. What we want is to clear out all the information, and then we want to append it. And so the way that we do that is before we get into all of this data, and before we output that to the screen, we want to go into panel menu, and we want to set the HTML. So everything inside that container is going to go to blank, to nothing. So when we set the HTML to nothing, it takes all of the HTML that's inside of this panel menu, and it just sort of makes it nothing. It makes it go away, removes it essentially, makes it blank. And then we can come back in, and then we can append all these things. So I'll show you how it works. So we come in, we get the right thing here, but what if someone got the bright idea to click here? We don't want it to add or append because we're only using the one panel, right? What we want is this information, we want it to just go away. And we want to add in the right information. And so when you click here, each time you click, it's clearing this out and then inserting the appropriate information. So that's what that does. Sometimes you need to clear out the information, sometimes you need to overwrite things or only append after certain parts. You just have to sort of think about the user experience and what you want to do. Alright, so we have two more pieces of data that we can get. We can get the favorites or the help. Okay, so it's going to be very similar to this. So let's just copy and paste this. So we say else if label is equal to favorites, then favorites is going to be equal to personal data dot favorites. I believe it's with an S. Yeah, it's favorites. And then website does not have an S. So for each favorites, we go through and we get the website, not websites. And we get the website by saying value dot website, and then we go into our panel menu, and then we're going to append our list item with the value that we saved for website. So let's go ahead and check that. So that should be with the favorites here. So when we click on it, you can see that all of our websites get put into our panel, and we still have about working just fine, and we still have our bookshelf working just fine. And now we just have to get our help links. Again, this is going to be very similar. So we come down and we do one more else if statement. And we say if the label is equal to help, then help links is what we'll call them. This is going to go into panel panel.help. Okay, and then we're going to loop through all of our panel .help links, which now is in this help links variable. And so we're going to get variable link, and that's going to be value dot link. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, links. Actually, let's just change our data to match that. Okay. So it's going to be val.link, and then for the data that we want each time we loop through, we're going to put in the link. Now you could actually, let's go ahead and let's make a change to this. So for each li, we want to actually have a real link in there. So we can create an href equals, and so this is actually, you know, how you would do a link. And then you could say the value that people are going to see for that link is going to be equal to link. We're just going to have a no URL there. Although very easily we could come through and we could do something like this, and we could say URL is equal to we could do something like that, and then we can take this URL. So we would have to say variable URL equals val.url, and then we could actually use our concatenation to put the URL in there. And so you would actually have a working URL. So let's just go ahead and do that for each of these. I didn't plan to do that, but it's just showing that you can attach different pieces of data for each of these things. So let's just do Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest, just to have some URLs in there. So now when it goes through, if the label is help, it goes into our panel data.help, and then for each of those help links, it's going to get the link, and that's just going to be, we should have done better than that. Let's do better than that. So let's say link name and link URL. Let's just make it a little bit more descriptive. Sort of going off the fly right now. So link name and link URL. So now we keep link and URL as variables, and they're collecting it from these pieces of data. And then for each list item, it's going in and inserting the URL into the ahref part where the URL would normally go for an anchor link. And then we're using the name for the link. Let's just do link name, just keep it consistent. And link URL. So then these have to be changed. Okay. So let's see how this works. Let's see if it all got hooked up right. So when we click over here, we should get a group of links. Something. unexpected string here. I didn't put the commas. Okay, no errors, it's good. And then when we click here, we get each of our links, right? And if we click on that link, it takes us to an actual place. Okay, so that that's how you would store other pieces of data together. Up here you could have multiple pieces of data for each book. You could have the book title, you could have when it was the book author, you know, what size is it, what year was it made. I mean, you can really just sort of create your data structures any way you want, and your favorites could be the website, it could be an actual URL. So similar to what we did here, you could actually put in a real URL, and you could insert that URL just like we did here. So instead of just having the name of the favorite, you actually have a link to your favorite websites. And then here I'll show you how you can do an anchor link, and then you put the anchor URL and the anchor name. So this is our data. It gets switched out regardless which menu item you choose. And you can see that we actually have written less. We don't even need these for it to work anymore, so we've got considerably less HTML. We're utilizing some attributes, some data attributes inside of our HTML, and we have grown our JavaScript file by quite a bit. This JSON could actually be removed and put into its own JSON file, and then instead of just looping through each thing, you would actually do a call to the JSON file, bring it into your app from another file, and then you would run all this. So I've covered that in some of my other API videos, so if you want to learn how to work with an API, I show you just this sort of thing. You know, how do you bring it in? How do you write your own JSON and your own like little small data sets that you can either bring in from another website, or you can bring in from another part of your own website on your own server, or just like this where you write it into the JavaScript just as an object that you can then cycle through that data. I hope this is helpful to you. This is sort of the beginnings of creating some sort of web application. And there's a lot more, you know, that you could do. There's a lot farther that you can go, but I hope this is really helpful to people. If it is, please give it a thumbs up, or share it on social media. That would be awesome. And also, if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to my channel, and what you'll get is a notification every time that I put a new video out, which is usually 1 or 2 a week, and trying to cover just some of the things that I'm working on, some issues maybe that people have. If you have a question or a comment, leave that in the comment section of the video, and I'm happy to get to you. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Brian Hefferkamp, and yeah, really excited about how this is going. I hope that other people can learn how to build web applications. I think it's the future, and learning how to use JSON data and bring that into your application or your website is really sort of an important skill to be learning and boning up on, so that you can begin to make Jamstack applications, and also working with JavaScript frameworks. It's helpful to be able to know how to deal with JSON data. All right, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.